This is the Decoding Obesity podcast, where we simplify, demystify, and decode obesity, helping you lose weight and feel great. So gear up for a fascinating journey through this ever-evolving field, and let's see what we find. And please remember that the thoughts and opinions on this podcast do not constitute medical advice. Don't forget to visit our website, www.decodingobesity.com, for show notes and more info. And now, here's your host of the Decoding Obesity podcast, Dr. Avishkar Sabharwal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Decoding Obesity podcast. Nowadays, it is very common to see fatty liver on abdominal imaging. I don't know how many times I've seen that on patients' imaging that comes to me. Now, this has become one of the hottest topics when it comes to liver health, because it has become so prevalent. Liver health and metabolism plays a very crucial role in obesity. Let's discuss this further with Dr. Marie Lipartia. Dr. Lipartia is board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine, and she has done some research in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as well. She is the founder and medical director of NUMEO Medical, which is a boutique-style obesity medicine practice offering a comprehensive and personalized approach to patients. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. You've done some research on non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but let's just start at the very basics. What exactly is fatty liver disease?
Yes, thank you. It's a very, as you said, very hot topic because it's becoming so common and the prevalence is so high and going higher. So fatty liver disease is abnormal accumulation of fat in the liver tissue. Right. So normally there is up to 5% of fat in the liver, and that's normal. But anything beyond then we call it fatty liver disease. And recently, actually, there's been some discussion of renaming this disease from non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to metabolic associated fatty liver disease, because it's just really associated with things like metabolic syndrome and obesity and diabetes, and we'll talk more about those.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, initially when this was discovered, it was probably just in patients who were consuming more alcohol. And that's why the whole concept of alcoholic fatty liver disease and the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because it was found that some patients who were not consuming alcohol also had fat deposition in their liver. And now that science is moving forward, we're seeing what's really causing this. And that's really fascinating. And I'm going to talk about this more with you. So what really causes all of this fat deposition?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a few theories of how that happens. We don't really know, but there's interesting study that was published a few years ago. And so what we know is that fat deposition in healthy liver that has up to 5% of fat and is healthy and it kind of has normal level of fat, the fat deposition pathway, fat accumulation there is different from when we have fatty liver disease. So, for example, we know that in healthy liver, the majority of fat deposits are coming from, dietary fat or like free fatty acids. And when they compare to patients who have fatty liver disease, a lot of fat deposition happens from what's called de novo lipogenesis or new fat formation. So it was not that much from the fat we eat or the fatty acids from the circulation, but different pathway that makes new fat. That was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and it's become a very complex pathophysiology. And there's this question of chicken or the egg, which comes first, the liver fat or obesity.
Yes.
And they're so closely interlinked. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting concept because we know that it's basically insulin resistance in the liver, right? So is that kind of disrupted pathways that's driving with insulin resistance, that's driving obesity and abnormal fat accumulation everywhere? Or is that primary obesity that's then secondarily causing the fatty liver disease, right? I don't think we have a clear answer to that at this point, but it's interesting that, yes, the fatty liver disease is usually associated with metabolic syndrome and very high prevalence in patients with obesity and with diabetes. For example, patients who have obesity and type 2 diabetes the prevalence of fatty liver disease almost like 90%.
Yeah.
So we know association, but we don't know what comes first, because now
First.
we are seeing this disease in lean patients also, right?
Right.
With some, metabolic dysfunctions. So what's the trigger? What is the first thing that goes wrong? We don't know for sure.
Yeah, and it's not just the obesity. I mean, fatty liver itself causes insulin resistance because we know that that is one of the major drivers of insulin resistance in somebody is
Mm-hmm.
the fat deposition in the liver.
Mm-hmm.
But how does our lifestyle impact fatty liver? I mean, this has really become a very, very prevalent problem now. It wasn't so few years ago, or I should say a couple of decades ago. How has our lifestyle impacted this?
Yeah, that's a great point. So what we know now is that in general population, at least 30% of people have this disease. And it's probably really underdiagnosed because we don't
Right.
routinely screen for it, right?
Of course.
So it's at least 30% going higher. And even in kids, prevalence is at least 10%. And that's also going higher. And we also know that it's number one chronic liver disease in Western countries, number
Yeah.
one cause of liver disease. And it's the leading cause of liver transplant requirement. And the
Wow.
first, number one for women, and I believe number two, it's on the rise, whereas
Yeah.
all the other causes are going down. So, it kind of correlates with mirrors if you look at the numbers, really, the prevalence increase and epidemiology of obesity as it's going higher. We all have seen this, these maps of, it's been about like less than 25%
Yeah.
decades ago and 30, and now everything is really dark red, and now about 42%. So that's going higher. Diabetes rate is going higher. So
Yeah.
as we said, what starts first, we don't know, but probably, coincides with a lot of things, right? All these metabolic diseases, change in our lifestyle, less physical activity, less like physical labor. We're not like going out and like doing physical work. It's all physical inactivity. A lot of processed food,
Right.
even when
I was going to say,
we,
yeah.
yeah, a lot of things are that's boxed in markets and marketed as healthy food. When it's almost, full of no one really knows what. A lot of sugar, a lot of added sugar, um, a lot of, fructose and high.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not just the added sugar, it's the fructose that's really
Yes.
driving a lot of the fat deposition in the liver. So, high fructose corn syrup or any sort of fructose. But actually, people might get confused because most of the fruits do have fructose in them. But
Yeah.
it's important to understand that the fructose that's there in the natural foods, it's tied to fiber. So the absorption is like really slow. It's not as rapid as you would see with something that's made with high fructose corn syrup, which is processed, and that gets really absorbed really quickly. And the metabolism of fructose takes place in the liver.
Yeah.
And that's where the lipogenesis or deposition of the fat or new fat formation in the liver really takes place. And that's really kind of what is one of the major driving factors for fat deposition in the
Yeah.
liver.
Yeah. It's such a great point. Yeah. So that one of these studies that I mentioned earlier, de novo lipogenesis or new fat formation, it's exactly that's driven by fructose, because what's difference between glucose and fructose is that, for example, if we eat something that's, let's say, starchy, right, that
Right.
are chains of glucose, what happens is that it goes into through liver and circulation, and whatever is excess, it goes to glycogen in liver and glycogen in muscle, right? This
Right.
glucose or sugar
Exactly.
deposits, and excess, it goes to like fat formation and is used for energy. Unlike fructose, that has really nowhere else to go, it has to be metabolized in the liver. And one study, it's actually nice that it's showing that it really depends the glycogen kind of tank, how
Hmm.
full is glycogen tank in liver. That determines which way that fructose goes. Because if glycogen tank is already full, if it's not full, that's where kind of fructose can be pushed to be converted and make kind of contribute to that glycogen storage. But if it's already full, it has nowhere else to go. and it's pushed towards making new fat in the liver.
Right.
And as you said, when we eat fruit, it's the slow, this chewing moment and slow absorption. And also in the gut, there is just it's really, as you said, slow absorption, delayed with
Right.
fiber and all the other nutrients. But when you are loading with a lot of sugar, your liver gets overwhelmed. We're not really, probably human liver or any animal liver is not designed to metabolize that much fructose in short period of time. And I think one of the things also is that, for example, fruit juice, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of times, especially marketed towards kids as a healthy and 100% and organic and et cetera, but
Yeah.
it's just sugar drink.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that's true for anything, yeah, people are just trying to put the word organic in front of anything and they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to portray that it's healthier. But really, even if it's organic, it doesn't matter. If it's
Right.
sugar, it's sugar.
Right. You can
And
have
so,
organic poison.
that's true.
Right. It's this marketing is like, putting on water like cholesterol free or things like
Yeah.
that. I mean,
Yeah,
some of
0
those
calories.
things
Like,
make no
that doesn't
sense,
make
right?
sense. It's just water. So, what are the downstream effects of, having this fatty liver, or how does it affect you over the years?
As you said, it's kind of driving this insulin resistance, right? It's insulin
Yeah.
resistance in the liver. Fatty liver disease itself is associated with higher like cardiovascular complications. So things like heart disease and heart attacks and stroke. So again, we don't know what's coming first, right? But it's all kind of association. It's associated with this metabolic syndrome and diabetes. And so all these other metabolic conditions that are associated with the higher mortality and the poor outcomes. But fatty liver itself, so there's fat deposition, and depending on how much fat is there, you can, with different tests, kind of grade the severity. And then over time, about 20% of all these patients will develop what's called steatohepatitis, right? So initially, it does
Right.
not have to be any inflammation or fibrosis, but over time, 20% will develop this disease, which is it's more inflammation, it's more like scar tissue formation. And then some percent of it will develop cirrhosis that's high risk for liver cancer, will require transplant surgery, so it will go to full kind of liver failure. And if we think of it, how prevalent it is, that at least 30% of population has it and it's on the
Yeah.
rise, and then you kind of 20% of that will develop hepatitis, and 20% will develop
Wow. That's a huge number.
liver disease. That's a huge number, and that's why it's number one cause of chronic liver disease.
Yeah, I mean, even amongst clinicians, sometimes it's undermined in terms of health, because really this is an emerging field in terms of, management of fatty liver and whatever. So, is this reversible really? Do we have any data about any medications that work on it, or any lifestyle changes that can cause the fat in the liver to go down?
Yeah, I think that best part, and why I think especially high risk patients should really be screened, is how reversible it is. And cornerstone is lifestyle and weight loss. So it's interesting that any weight loss is helpful for fatty liver disease. And it's reported that just 3% of weight loss, which is so 3% of
Oh
total
wow,
body
yeah, that's
weight,
just tiny.
right, improves the fat, or at least steatosis, right, fat deposition. And more than 5% weight loss improves the inflammation that's associated with the fatty liver. And it's reported that weight loss more than 10% so 10% of total body weight, right? It improves even fibrosis, or this,
Oh
scar
wow.
tissue.
So that's
Yes.
reversible too. That's amazing.
Even advanced stages are reversible.
Yeah, we know that liver has great potential of, reversing back and
hmm
kind of healing itself. So it's very encouraging to see that, small changes in your lifestyle can really help move you in the right direction as far as fatty liver goes.
Right. And the other thing is exercise.
Oh, yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
exercise, even without weight loss, which is, I think, the most important part that can improve the liver fat and fibrosis. So the it's important that we should never, when we talk about exercise, never link exercise to weight loss.
that's true.
Because a lot of times people start exercising and, it's weight loss does not come just with, routine exercise,
Exercise.
right? And
Yeah.
then a lot of times they quit, oh, I'm not losing weight anyway. So it's important to know and understand that with exercise, it's not just weight loss. Even without pound lost, it improves the histologic. So, what we are seeing on the tissue parameters. So it's huge, and all types of exercises, aerobic or strength training or, cardio. So it's really, really important. And, there are some medications, but the lifestyle and weight management exercise are really, really cornerstone. I mean, I don't want to name specific medications, right?
Of course.
But whether some vitamins or things that improve histology, but that should be always combined with the lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, the cornerstone really remains a good diet and exercise,
Mm-hmm.
really. But what about, medications like statins? Do they help at all?
There is some data, but it's not.
It's still
It's not.
controversial, right?
It's still
Yeah.
controversial, and studies are kind of results are conflicting. Few medications that are more used, for example, like that are approved for treatment. But
I
again,
think food is the best medication. Do you agree?
absolutely, absolutely is the best. But a lot of times the question is, okay, like, is there a specific food, right?
Right,
That's
that's
where
true.
we.
That's yeah, I think you have to look at it from a broader perspective and understand it has to be just food that you need to eat. There was a guest on my podcast and who mentioned this term food and food-like substances, and it just stuck
Yes.
with me. So as long as it's food and not food-like substances, I think you're good.
Exactly. Especially that all the studies that we are, so, whether it's low fat and high carb or low carb, high fat, as long as it is coming from whole food,
Yeah.
both are associated with improved fatty liver disease
That's a good
improvement.
point. Yes, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what type of diet it is as long as it's whole foods.
As long as it's
It's
whole,
real
there
food.
are some differences in, different endpoints, but when we talk about fatty liver per se, both have seen, we have seen some improvements from both kind of approach, as long as it's, but, I think the most important is, again, fructose. I mean, when I have
Right.
patient with fatty liver disease, one of the things I try to, given that we know it's a fructose that drives de novo lipogenesis and new fat formation, one of the things I recommend is to eliminate all the added sugar, and for some time even, limit very high sugar fruit and focus more on, low sugar fruit and a lot of vegetables.
Absolutely.
Um, and, avoiding all the especially sugar sweetened beverages or fruit juice. But goal always is to transition to whole food, where honestly, when you are eating whole food, you don't really need to count anything, calories
Exactly.
or macros, unless you are doing something, specific, right? For
Absolutely.
like some specific goal, let's say.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to point out to listeners is it's not just high fructose corn syrup. Really, if you
Mhm.
look at the cane sugar or table sugar, that also
Mhm.
has fructose in it. It's
Right,
50%
right.
fructose and 50% glucose. So
Mhm.
it's not to say that it's just high fructose corn syrup. It's any
No.
form of sugar that you look at,
Mhm.
unless it's specifically glucose or it's
Mhm.
milk that doesn't have fructose in it. Otherwise, sucrose in its form, like the
Mhm.
table sugar, does have fructose also
Yep,
in it.
it's 50-50. So the only difference between regular sugar, what we call sugar, table sugar, and high fructose is that in high fructose corn syrup, it's 5% more
More,
fructose and
exactly.
little less glucose. But otherwise, it's all 50-50. And it's just really too much for our cells to handle.
Yeah. And how quickly do you see in your patients reversing this fatty liver with weight loss? How quickly does it start occurring?
You know, parameters start improving within 3 months. As soon as those, metabolic parameters are changed and weight starts coming off or exercise is added, you will start seeing improvement. So it's not years; it is within weeks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's the fascinating part about the physical health, that once you start improving all of these things, your lifestyle, you start seeing results fairly quickly.
right, it's interesting that if you, let's say, you do, for example, blood work, right, and
Yeah.
you check some metabolic parameters like even high sensitivity CRP or things like that, it starts improving way before you start losing weight.
Yep. And yeah, for our listeners, high sensitivity CRP is just another measure of inflammation in the body that we use. So yeah, that also starts
Yeah.
improving fairly quickly with
Mm-hmm.
changing your
Yeah,
lifestyle.
changes in lipid panel, cholesterol, high sensitivity CRP, your insulin levels, it just starts improving so quickly and even before you're seeing any physical changes. So it's really, really fascinating and so underappreciated how much we can change, how much control we have.
Yeah. So, Murray, people sitting at home, how can they start losing the liver fat? What can they start doing today to make this change?
I think my number one advice to everyone is start with, kind of writing down and visualizing what are the things, what's the goal, and then break down in steps so that it's not overwhelming. You cannot just start doing 10 things on one day and follow through. So for me, the way I approach, I write down the big goal and then kind of how to get there and what are the tools. So let's say if we are someone who gets a lot of soda and processed food and like a lot of takeout from fast food, the number one I do is get rid of, let's say, sugar sweetened beverages, right? And so we just kind of break down all these steps how to get there. But I think number one would be to move as much as possible, as much as you are able to. It does not have to be formal like exercise, and you don't have to go and sign up for gym membership, but it's just general physical activity and movement that makes it goes really long way, whether using stairs or just getting up from the desk every few minutes. So physical activity and starting with kind of evaluating where is your eating habit, starting
Yeah.
from eliminating sugar. I mean, there is not a single person that benefits from added sugar in the diet, right? So it's no matter what you like, whether it's, what is your lifestyle, added sugar is not good for anyone. And then kind of going from there, focusing on eating food. And that should be as simple as that. You don't have to guess like how much and what when you are actually eating food.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about sugar. I remember either listening to this somewhere or reading it somewhere. Somebody pointed out a very valid point. Sugar in itself does not have a recommended daily allowance.
Right.
Really, sugar is not necessary for us.
Yes.
So that's very important to understand, that really you can eliminate sugar from your diet safely. And by
Exactly.
sugar, I
Exactly.
mean added sugar like
Added
table
sugar.
sugar
Mm-hmm.
or high fructose corn syrup in any form. Even things like honey,
Yes.
things like agave nectar, things like maple syrup, all of these have sugars in them.
Mm-hmm.
And they are
Mm-hmm.
much more bioavailable, even though they may be naturally occurring
Mm-hmm.
sugars, but they are not really that healthy.
Right. Right. So for example, like honey decades ago was really a treat, right? No one had honey at home sitting all
Yeah.
the time on shelves. So it's just, we normalized it, but our livers have not normalized it. And they're really, really, our pancreas really, really suffering. We just need, I mean, I don't know, maybe years from now, our
Once we
livers
evolve.
will be, will have different mechanisms and enzymes working to kind of start metabolizing this fructose. But for now, we're just really suffering. And you're right. For example, low carb diet, right? So we know that like when we look at macros, we have essential amino acids, proteins, essential fatty acids. We don't really need to function any carbs. So whatever you are getting, like if you get from all the whole food, whether from a lot of vegetables, even if you include like fruit, like even 4 serving of fruit, your amount of the total carbohydrates that you get is still so much lower than if you eat
Absolutely.
anything processed. So if you are eating, you don't have to be on like low carb or very low carb diet. Even if you are just on whole food diet, no matter what kind of food you eat, automatically it just fixes your macros by itself, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there are people who will benefit more from low carb, some, prefer beyond, more high carb and low fat. And we don't know. Maybe there are some genetic differences how we handle. We know that different ethnicities, people of different ethnicities handle, like, for example, carbs, or they metabolize different ways, right? And it's probably from all this time, what our ancestors ate. I'm sure we have different activities of different enzymes. I'm sure there are some differences that we are just not able to really measure. So it depends on how metabolize things.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what type of diet you follow, whether it's a low carb diet or a high
Mm-hmm.
carb diet, as long as you're eating whole foods, and that's really the key.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Regardless of the diet you follow, it
Yes.
should be comprised mostly of whole foods.
Mm-hmm.
I won't
Yes.
say completely, because in this day and age, practically speaking, it can be very, very difficult to
Mm-hmm.
go on a completely whole food diet. If you can, kudos to you. That's the best thing you can do
Yeah.
for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you cannot, then it should be mostly whole foods, real
Yes.
foods, and not food like
Yeah.
substances.
Yeah. At least 80%, I think.
Right,
At
right,
least
right.
most of the time. And if you do
Yeah,
it, once in a while, or if it's like some kind of, whether it's dinner or celebration or something, I don't think, eating like huge piece of cake once, or, even once a week or something, will really derail and like ruin completely your metabolism, right? I think
sure.
it's this constant dripping of all these substances inside that's ruining metabolism.
Constant dripping of these organic
Yeah.
poisons.
Organic, yes, organic, 100% natural. I mean, we have organic sugar and like raw sugar, and a lot of people fall for it, right? They
Yeah, it's
they
all
they
marketing. It's just
pay
amazing.
extra, and they think they're doing something really beneficial for themselves, and it's
Yeah.
not.
Oh, that's why we are here. I mean, that's why I try to do this, to kind of get this message out to people so that they can understand the reality of it,
Yeah, yeah.
really, and how they can start living healthy. So, Mary, how can people reach you?
Yes, so I am on social media as Dr. Lipartia, DrLipartia, on all platforms. And you can also find my practice, which is NUMEO Medical and UMEO Medical. And it's oneword.com.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to link to your website and your social in my show notes,
Thank you.
so people will be able to find you from my website as well. Listeners, don't forget to drop in a review. I would love to hear from you and love to know what your feedback is. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining me. And thank you, everyone, for listening in. I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Decoding Obesity podcast. Please remember, the information in this podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the host and his guests and do not constitute medical advice. Views and opinions on this show do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of any organization. And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening in. Don't forget to visit our website, www.decodingobesity.com, for show notes and more info. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.